There are wars that erupt suddenly, and there are wars that reveal something that was already breaking. This is the second kind. Because when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it was not simply an act of aggression. It was a test of modern authoritarian power, a test of democratic resilience, a test of whether force could rewrite reality in the 21st century. And for a moment, it looked like power might prevail. Columns of armored vehicles moved across borders, missiles struck airports before dawn, fighter jets roared across the sky, Russian state media projected certainty, efficiency, inevitability, dominance. It was meant to be overwhelming. It was meant to communicate one message: resistance is futile. But power, when untested, often mistakes performance for strength. Inside the Kremlin, the invasion had been framed not as a gamble, but as correction, a restoration, a strategic necessity. Vladimir Putin had spent years convincing himself that Ukraine was artificial, politically, culturally, historically, that its independence was an anomaly, that its democracy was fragile, that its people were divided. And once that belief hardened into doctrine, invasion became logical. Inside Russia's centralized political system, dissent had long since disappeared. Officials did not rise by challenging assumptions. They rose by reinforcing them. Intelligence was filtered upward. Risk assessments softened. Optimistic projections emphasized. Putin was not operating in darkness. He was operating inside an echo chamber. And echo chambers are loudest right before they collapse. When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine, they were prepared for shock and surrender. What they encountered instead was organization. Local governments activated emergency systems within hours. Civil defense units mobilized. Volunteer supply networks formed overnight. Railway workers kept evacuation corridors open. Engineers secured digital infrastructure. Doctors reorganized hospitals under fire. This was not panic, it was coordination. Ukraine did not react as a collapsing state. It reacted as a mobilized society. The assault on Kiev stalled within weeks. Logistics faltered, fuel ran dry, command lines broke, convoys became stranded targets, Russian forces withdrew from the north, leaving behind destroyed equipment and evidence of atrocities that reshaped international opinion overnight. And that was the moment power was truly tested, because brute force alone had failed. Putin shifted tactics. If speed could not secure victory, attrition would. Missile strikes intensified, energy infrastructure was targeted, heating systems destroyed before winter, residential areas hit repeatedly. The objective was psychological erosion, make daily life unbearable, make surrender rational, make exhaustion permanent. But something unexpected happened again. Ukraine adapted. Energy grids were decentralized, generators distributed, repair crews worked through bombardment, schools moved underground, businesses adjusted schedules, families reorganized routines, life continued, not normally, but defiantly. And as Ukraine endured, the international system recalibrated. Western governments that had initially hesitated began accelerating support, intelligence sharing deepened, training programs expanded, advanced weapons systems were deployed, economic sanctions intensified. Ukraine was no longer fighting alone. It was integrated into a coalition, not symbolically, operationally. And that changed the character of the war. Precision replaced volume. Coordination replaced improvisation. Intelligence replaced assumption. Russian supply hubs were struck deep behind front lines. Command posts were dismantled. Logistics fractured. The war became less about territorial spectacle and more about systemic pressure. And under pressure, systems reveal their strength. Ukraine revealed adaptability. Russia revealed rigidity. Ukraine encouraged initiative. Russia punished deviation. Ukraine learned, Russia repeated. And over time, that divergence widened. Casualties mounted, equipment losses accumulated, mobilization orders expanded. Russian society felt the strain. Economic isolation deepened. Technological access narrowed. Regional budgets tightened. Political repression intensified. The war that was meant to demonstrate control began exposing fragility. Because authoritarian systems are efficient at suppressing dissent, but inefficient at correcting error. And error uncorrected compounds. Today, this conflict is no longer just about territory. It is about legitimacy, about whether power can be imposed without consent, about whether fear can sustain stability, about whether institutions built on obedience can outperform societies built on participation. Ukraine's resistance is not just military, it is institutional, civic, psychological, moral. And that is why this war has redefined more than borders. It has redefined power itself. In part 2, we will examine how Ukraine transformed external support into strategic advantage, and how Russia's internal pressures are reshaping the political landscape inside the Kremlin. By the second year of the war, Ukraine was no longer fighting the invasion it had faced in February 2022. It was fighting a different war, a more complex war, a more technical war, a more systemic war. The emergency phase was over. The improvisation phase had passed. Ukraine had entered the institutional phase. This is the phase most countries never reach because it requires something rare under bombardment: discipline, patience, self-criticism, and long-term thinking. While missiles were still falling and cities were still burning, Ukraine was quietly building a machine designed not just to survive, but to adapt. It began with information. War is confusion, unless you can see. And by mid-2022, Ukraine could see satellite imagery from allies, signals intelligence, drone surveillance, cyber monitoring, radar tracking, open source analysis, all converged in Ukrainian command centers. Commanders were no longer guessing. They were analyzing Russian troop movements, supply routes, rotation cycles, command hierarchies, weak points, patterns emerged. And patterns are vulnerabilities. Once patterns are visible, they can be exploited. Ukraine exploited them. Instead of confronting Russian forces head-on, Ukrainian planners began dismantling the structures that sustained them: fuel depots, ammunition warehouses, rail junctions, bridge crossings, repair facilities, command posts, one by one. Precision weapons made this possible: long-range rocket systems, guided artillery, counter-battery radar, advanced drones, electronic warfare tools. Each delivery expanded Ukraine's options. Each system reduced Russia's margin for error. Frontline Russian units became isolated, undersupplied, disoriented, and vulnerable. The war was being won behind the front. Air defense became another pillar. Layered systems intercepted missiles, protected infrastructure, preserved industrial capacity, allowed schools and hospitals to function, gave civilians psychological space, and psychological space is strategic space. At sea, Ukraine innovated. Without a large navy, it used naval drones, coastal missiles, satellite targeting, and cyber disruption to push back the Black Sea Fleet. Ports reopened, exports resumed, economic lifelines were restored. It was asymmetric warfare at its most sophisticated. Training transformed the force. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers rotated through Western programs. They learned combined arms coordination, urban combat, counter-drone tactics, battlefield medicine, leadership under pressure. They returned as instructors, multipliers, institution builders. A professional culture spread. Ukraine became a learning army. Mistakes were documented, lessons disseminated, innovation rewarded. Russia's system punished deviation. Failure was hidden. Initiative was dangerous. Learning stalled. The gap widened. Logistics became strategy. Repair hubs multiplied. Spare parts networks expanded. Maintenance brigades specialized. Medical evacuation chains improved. Rehabilitation centers opened. Psychological support programs developed. Ukraine treated soldiers as long-term investments. Russia treated them as expendable inputs, and expendable inputs get wasted. Domestic industry reorganized. Civilian factories shifted to defense production. Garages became drone labs. Startups became suppliers. Universities became research centers. Volunteers became logisticians. Civilian and military spheres fused, not by decree, by cooperation. Sanctions amplified divergence. Russia lost access to semiconductors, precision machinery, aerospace components, advanced software. Replacement cycles broke, maintenance faltered, complex systems degraded. Ukraine, supported by allies, modernized, capability increased. By 2023 and beyond, Ukraine was no longer merely receiving aid. It was co-designing operations, participating in strategic planning, sharing intelligence, influencing doctrine. It was no longer a dependent partner. It was a central node. And this had political consequences. Western governments became invested in outcomes. Credibility became linked to Ukrainian success. Commitment deepened. For Putin, this evolution was devastating. Every Ukrainian advance strengthened alliance cohesion. Every Russian setback weakened Moscow's leverage. Isolation intensified, dependence grew, prestige evaporated, and still Ukraine advanced. Slowly, deliberately, sustainably, the war had become a competition between systems, between learning and obedience, between transparency and secrecy, between participation and coercion. Ukraine had built a system designed to improve. Russia had preserved one designed to comply. And in modern warfare, improvement defeats compliance every time. There is a moment in every long war when the enemy is no longer only across the border, it is inside the system itself, inside the leadership, inside the institutions, inside the stories a government tells its people. For Vladimir Putin, that moment arrived when it became impossible to pretend that this war was under control, when victory could no longer be promised, when failure could no longer be concealed, when uncertainty became permanent. From that point forward, the Kremlin was no longer managing a military campaign. It was managing a crisis of authority. For more than 20 years, Putin's power had rested on predictability. He offered stability in exchange for obedience. He offered prosperity in exchange for political silence. He offered security in exchange for loyalty. It was a transaction, and it had worked until war disrupted the balance. Because war exposes everything. It exposes corruption. It exposes incompetence. It exposes fragility. It exposes lies. Inside the Kremlin, information became distorted. Bad news was filtered, losses minimized, failures reframed, reality edited, not always by direct order, but by fear. Officials learned that honesty was dangerous, optimism was rewarded, silence was safest. So the leadership stopped hearing the truth, and leadership that does not hear the truth becomes dangerous to itself. Military command reflected this dysfunction. Generals were rotated rapidly. Some were promoted for loyalty, others removed after setbacks. Doctrine shifted without explanation. Operations lacked continuity. Strategy became reactive. It was not adaptation, it was improvisation under pressure. Security services expanded their reach. Surveillance intensified. New laws criminalized dissent. Online posts became evidence. Private conversations became risks. Public silence became policy. But silence is not support. It is withdrawal. It is fear. It is disengagement. Independent media disappeared. Journalists were labeled foreign agents. Universities were monitored. Teachers were instructed in patriotic education. History was rewritten. Children were taught to glorify sacrifice. Memory was militarized. But lived experience contradicted propaganda. Families saw sons return wounded, or not return at all. Villages lost generations, funerals multiplied, hospitals filled. These realities circulated quietly in encrypted chats, in kitchen conversations, in whispered phone calls. Doubt spread. Inside elite circles, behavior changed. Assets moved abroad. Residences diversified. Relatives relocated. Dual citizenship pursued. Exit plans prepared. Not rebellion. Insurance, a sign of declining confidence. Then came the rupture. The Wagner Mutiny. A state-backed private army turned against the state. Its leader accused top generals of incompetence. He seized territory. He marched toward Moscow. And for hours, there was no decisive response, no unified command, no immediate suppression, just hesitation. That hesitation was catastrophic. It revealed fragmentation. It revealed vulnerability. It revealed that authority was no longer automatic. Although the mutiny ended quickly, the damage was lasting. The illusion of absolute control was gone. The later death of Wagner's leader restored fear. But fear is not legitimacy, it is a substitute. And substitutes expire. After that episode, paranoia deepened. Security protocols multiplied, personal guards increased, access narrowed. Putin retreated further into isolation, and isolation erodes judgment. Leaders who do not hear reality begin governing fiction. Propaganda shifted tone. Early war narratives promised triumph. Now they promised endurance, sacrifice, victimhood. Russia was portrayed as besieged, morally superior, historically destined to suffer. This reframing normalized failure. It made loss acceptable, but it also lowered expectations. People stopped believing in victory. They started hoping for survival. Economically, strain became visible. Regional budgets shrank, healthcare deteriorated, education stagnated. Infrastructure projects stalled, military spending soared. Everything else became secondary. The state became a war apparatus, not a service provider, and citizens noticed. Meanwhile, Ukraine's successes intensified pressure. Every liberated town, every destroyed depot, every intercepted missile, every drone strike was proof that the war was not contained, not distant, not manageable. It was personal. Border regions were evacuated. Air defenses appeared in city centers. Blackouts spread. Fear entered daily life. The war came home, and that changes politics.